under oath who caused these injuries?
My father, Douglas Pierce.
You're really doing this in court?
The gavel didn't sound loud, it sounded final. One sharp crack, and the air in the courtroom tightened like someone had pulled a cord. Savannah Pierce stood at the witness table with her hands clasped so hard, her knuckles went pale beneath the courthouse lights. A stack of papers sat in front of her, medical records, clinic notes, imaging summaries, photocopied and tabbed with neon stickers. Across the aisle, her father stared straight ahead. Douglas Pierce wore the same navy suit he wore to church and school meetings, pressed so perfectly it looked like armor. His jaw was set in that familiar way Savannah had learned to read as warning. "Don't embarrass me." The judge leaned forward, eyes on the file. "Ms. Pierce," he said, measured, "you understand you're under oath?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you're asking this court to find these injuries were not accidents?" Savannah's throat tightened. She forced the words through anyway. "They weren't." A quiet stirred in the gallery, someone shifting, someone breathing in too fast. The judge lifted his gaze. "Then tell me plainly, who caused them?" Savannah didn't look at her father. She looked at the clock above the jury box, the second hand moving like it had no idea what it cost to speak. "My father," she said, "Douglas Pierce." In that moment, the story stopped being a private thing. It became a public record, and if you're wondering how a daughter proves years of secret beatings without a hidden camera, without a confession, without a neighbor who saw everything, you have to go back to the first time Savannah learned what silence buys and what it steals. Savannah grew up in a house with two climates. One was warm, Saturday pancakes, family photos, Douglas lifting her onto his shoulders at the county fair, neighbors calling him a good man, teachers praising him for being involved. The other climate was cold. It didn't matter if it was July. When Douglas's voice dropped low and his steps became heavy and deliberate, the hallway felt narrower. The air felt thinner. Savannah learned to watch the smallest cues, the set of his shoulders, the way he put down a glass, the silence before his words. Douglas didn't look like the kind of man people feared. He didn't stumble, he didn't slur, he didn't show up with visible chaos. He showed up with control, rules, order, and a kind of anger that was careful. Savannah's mother, Lila, wasn't cruel. That was the most confusing part. Lila was gentle, tired, and trained to keep peace. When Douglas got cold, Lila didn't confront him. She managed him. She smoothed the edges. She explained things away with a soft voice and a nervous smile. Savannah watched her do it and learned a brutal lesson. Sometimes love is present, but protection isn't. Douglas's discipline rarely left marks where outsiders would notice. He knew the difference between a bruise on a forearm and a bruise under a shirt. He knew which explanations sounded believable because he practiced them. She fell. She's clumsy. She doesn't listen. And for a long time, the world accepted those stories, partly because people want to believe the clean version, especially when the storyteller looks respectable. The first hospital visit Savannah remembers clearly happened in winter. The cold made everything sharper, the bite of air, the sting of the seatbelt, the sterile brightness of the emergency room. Lila checked Savannah in with a tight voice. "Fell down the stairs," she said. Savannah sat on a plastic chair, taking shallow breaths because deeper ones hurt. A nurse asked, "How did you fall?" Savannah glanced at her mother's shaking hands and answered, "I slipped." A doctor examined her ribs, asked her to rate the pain, asked if she felt safe at home. Savannah didn't understand the question then. Safe meant locked doors. Safe meant staying out of trouble. Safe didn't mean your own father. So she nodded. Yes. The doctor ordered imaging, typed notes into a computer, and sent her home with instructions to rest. In the car ride back, Lila whispered something Savannah would carry for years. Don't make him mad. Not, tell the truth, not, I'm sorry, just don't make him mad. The next morning, Douglas was warm again. He made breakfast, he asked about school, he acted like nothing had happened. And that was its own kind of violence. How quickly the world reset, how easily the injury was expected to disappear along with the story. Over time, the incidents came like weather fronts, not constant, but inevitable. Sometimes it was a bruised shoulder that lingered for days. Sometimes it was a sprained wrist. Sometimes it was a split lip explained as a fall. Sometimes it was pain that didn't have a dramatic name, but changed the way Savannah moved. Douglas's anger didn't always arrive with a strike. Sometimes it arrived with humiliation, with long lectures, with punishments designed to erase privacy. Door removed, phone taken, freedom narrowed until Savannah felt like the house itself was watching. And then, in public, he'd shift back into the warm climate. At church, his hand on her shoulder like a proud father. At school events, his smile wide, his voice friendly, his reputation intact. Savannah learned to perform normal. She learned to smile while her body stayed braced. She learned to say, I'm fine, like a reflex. And here's the problem with secrets like this. They don't survive because nobody notices anything. They survive because fear and confusion teach a child to protect the person harming them. Because speaking feels dangerous. And because the abuser counts on silence more than force. If you've ever watched someone you love shrink in the presence of another person and you didn't know, why, remember this, shrinking is a language too. It's the body translating danger when the mouth can't. When Savannah was 15, something changed, not in Douglas, but in her. Her high school assigned a new counselor, Ms. Rios. Savannah was called in for a routine check-in after her grades slipped slightly. 2 Bs. Douglas had treated it like betrayal. He accused her of throwing away her future, then punished her in ways that were hard to explain to outsiders. That week, he took her bedroom door off its hinges. No privacy until you earn it, he said, loud enough for Lila to hear. Lila didn't fight him. She just looked down. A few days later, Ms. Rios handed Savannah a form for a tutoring program. Your parent has to sign, she said gently. Savannah stared at the signature line and felt dread curl in her stomach. In her house, signatures were power. She brought it home and placed it on the counter like it was fragile. Douglas picked it up, scanned it, and his expression shifted from calm to cold. You trying to make me look like a bad father? He asked. No, Savannah said quickly. It's just extra help. Douglas's hand hit the counter hard enough to rattle the glass jar of sugar. You talk to strangers about this family, he said, voice low, and you'll regret it. Savannah didn't argue. She waited until he left the room, then forged his signature with a shaking hand. And the moment the pen lifted from paper, Savannah felt something new. If paper could be used to control her, paper could also be used to protect her. That night, she opened a notebook, not a diary, a record, date, time, what happened, where Lila was, what Douglas said, what the injury felt like, where they went for care. Facts, simple, unromantic, because facts don't need permission. Savannah carried that notebook through the rest of high school, like a hidden bone in her pocket, something solid to press against when reality got slippery. Because Douglas did the thing that kept her confused. He reset. After an incident, he'd become warm again. He'd buy groceries, fix a faucet, ask about homework. And that warmth made Savannah question herself. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I deserved it. That's how refined control works. It doesn't just hurt you, it teaches you to doubt the hurt, But the notebook didn't doubt. It waited, entry after entry, quiet proof growing in the dark. When Savannah turned 18, she left for college 2 hours away. The first night in her dorm, the silence felt strange. Not the fearful kind, but the open kind. No heavy footsteps, no low voice, no countdown. And still, her body didn't trust it. A slammed door down the hall made her heart sprint. A raised voice in a cafeteria made her flinch. Sleep came in fragments. One night, after waking from a nightmare where she couldn't speak, she went to the campus counseling center and sat across from a therapist named Dr. Nolan. Savannah stared at the carpet and said, "My dad gets angry." Dr. Nolan didn't demand details. He asked one question. "Are you safe now?" Savannah hesitated. "I don't know," she whispered, because safety wasn't just distance. Safety was the ability to breathe without expecting pain. Dr. Nolan gave Savannah language, not strict, not discipline, abuse. And once it had a name, it had a shape. And once it had a shape, Savannah could see where to push. The turning point came during winter break. Savannah went home because she didn't have money to stay on campus, and because refusing felt like inviting a fight she wasn't ready to survive. The house looked the same, Douglas looked the same. Savannah didn't. She spoke more carefully. She disagreed, slightly, in small moments. She didn't rush to apologize. Douglas sensed it like a change in pressure. At dinner, he studied her and said, "You've gotten mouthy." Savannah kept her voice even. "I'm older." Douglas set his fork down slowly. "You think that means you don't follow my rules?" "I think it means you don't get to talk to me like I'm a child." The room went quiet. Lila's eyes widened. Douglas smiled. Small, controlled, dangerous. "Go to your room," he said. Savannah walked away at a normal pace. She didn't hurry. Later, from behind her closed door, she heard his footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. "Open it," he said. Savannah felt her stomach drop. She reached for her phone, thumb hovering over the emergency button. Then Douglas pounded the door. Once, twice. Lila's voice floated down the hall. "Doug, stop!" Douglas cut her off. "Stay out of it." Savannah heard Lila's footsteps retreat, and in that retreat, she understood the truth she'd avoided. In this house, she was alone. Savannah pressed the emergency call and whispered to the dispatcher, "My dad is trying to get into my room." Police arrived within minutes. Red and blue lights spilled across the front yard, flashing against curtains, making the secret visible in a way Douglas couldn't smooth over. Douglas opened the door, calm, offended, controlled. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. Savannah stepped into the hallway, hands shaking. An officer looked at her, really looked. "Are you okay?" he asked. Savannah's voice broke. "No." It was the first full truth she'd spoken out loud in that house. That night didn't end with Douglas in handcuffs. He didn't swing, he didn't shout, he played confused, and the officers did what people often do when there's no fresh injury, and the abuser looks respectable. They advised, they separated, they recommended resources. But Savannah didn't need a pamphlet. She needed out. She left the next morning and never slept in that house again. Back on campus, Savannah did the thing that turned her story into a case. She requested her medical records, from the emergency room, from the pediatric clinic, from the urgent care, from every place Lila had ever driven her under the cover of accidents. The records arrived in envelopes and PDFs codes, abbreviations, notes written in clinical language that didn't care about family reputation. Savannah spread the pages across her apartment floor like evidence, because that's what they were. And when she read them carefully, she saw what Douglas never expected her to see. Patterns, repeated visits, similar explanations, and, scattered like small signals, the words that mattered most: injury inconsistent with explanation. Patient quiet, avoids eye contact when parent present. Parent answers for patient. Hesitation noted. Then she found something that made her hands go cold, an imaging report from an old ER visit that mentioned signs of prior healing. Savannah didn't understand what that meant until she asked Dr. Nolan to help her find a specialist who could explain it without guessing. That's how Dr. Anika Patel entered the story, a forensic pediatrician who reviewed records for courts. Dr. Patel didn't know Savannah. She had no reason to be on anyone's side. She read the records, compared dates, looked at the imaging summaries, and said quietly, "This isn't a single accident. This is a pattern over time." Savannah stared at her. "So the records, they show it." Dr. Patel nodded. "They don't narrate it in emotional language," she said. "But they don't have to. Medicine documents what it sees." Savannah realized something painful. Her body had been telling the truth all along. The world just hadn't known how to listen. Her next meeting was with a civil attorney named Keisha Grant. Keisha didn't promise a payday. She didn't talk like a billboard. She asked questions. "Did you report it as a child?" "No." "Any direct witnesses?" "Not like that." "What do you have?" Savannah slid the folder across the desk. Her notebook went on top. Keisha flipped through, slower and slower, as if the case was assembling itself in her mind. "This is more than most survivors have," Keisha said. Savannah's throat tightened. "It still feels like nothing." Keisha looked up. "It's not nothing. It's a spine." Keisha explained the difference between criminal and civil proof. Criminal cases demand certainty that's hard to reach years later without fresh evidence. Civil court asks a different question. Is it more likely than not? And civil court can hold someone financially responsible for harm, physical, psychological, economic. Savannah listened as Keisha outlined claims: assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the long trail of costs that follow abuse. Therapy, disrupted. Education, medical care, diminished earning potential. "You can sue your own father?" Savannah asked. Keisha nodded. "Yes, and you can choose what you want from it. Money, accountability, a record. But you don't choose based on guilt." Savannah left the office with a new fear, because filing meant lighting the secret on fire in public, but it also meant Douglas couldn't keep owning the story. The lawsuit hit Douglas like an insult. He called Savannah 8 times in a day. She didn't answer. He left voicemails that moved through masks: confusion, anger, bargaining, and then the voice Savannah knew best, quiet and threatening. "You're making a mistake," he said, "and you're going to pay for it." Keisha told Savannah to save everything. Threats weren't just intimidation, they were evidence of ongoing control. Douglas hired a firm that specialized in protecting reputations. Their strategy was immediate: attack Savannah. They called her unstable. They implied therapy had rewritten her memories. They suggested she was greedy, dramatic, vindictive. They tried to access her counseling records. Keisha fought it, and the judge set limits, but the message was clear. Douglas's defense wasn't remorse. It was damage control. Then discovery began. Subpoenas went out for medical records, school records, and communications. Douglas's lawyers resisted. The judge compelled production. What came back wasn't a confession. It was worse. Texts from Douglas to Lila after incidents. Short, cold instructions. Say it was the stairs. Keep her home tomorrow. Don't let her talk to anyone. Savannah read those words and felt a slow, sick confirmation. The cover stories weren't accidents. They were planned. Keisha also found a draft email Douglas had written to himself, never sent, but saved, like a checklist. Control narrative, keep calm, deny, maintain image. Not the notes of a father struggling, the notes of a man managing consequences. And then came Depositions, a conference room, beige walls, a court reporter typing every word into permanence. Douglas sat across from Savannah and Keisha with a practiced calm, the kind he used in public. He answered no like it was a reflex. Did you ever strike your daughter? No. Did you ever coach your wife on what to tell medical staff? No. Keisha placed the texts in front of him. Douglas stared at them, then said, "That could mean anything." Keisha's voice stayed even. "What did it mean, Mr. Pierce?" Douglas leaned back. "She fell," he said. "My wife panicked. I helped her explain. People twist things." It was the same strategy Savannah had lived under for years. Deny, minimize, redirect, make everyone else the problem. But depositions do one thing abusers hate. They remove the escape of charm. They leave only the words. And Douglas's words, when recorded, started to look less like a father and more like a man protecting a story. As trial approached, the defense offered a settlement, $100,000. No admission, strict confidentiality. They raised it, $200,000, $500,000. Each increase was the same offer with a higher price tag. Sell your silence. Savannah felt the temptation because exhaustion is powerful and money can look like relief. But she remembered the nurse asking, "Do you feel safe at home?" and her lying. She wasn't signing another lie. "I want it on the record," Savannah told Keisha. Keisha nodded. "Then we take it to a jury." Trial began in late spring. The courthouse air smelled like rain on concrete and old coffee. Inside, the courtroom stayed cold. Keisha opened with a simple line. "This is not a case about strict parenting," she said. "This is a case about hidden violence." She told the jury what the evidence would show: repeated injuries, repeated cover stories, medical notes that didn't match the explanations, and a young woman finally brave enough to connect the dots. The defense tried to reframe it as discipline and teen rebellion. They warned the jury about regret-fueled accusations. They asked them to protect the idea of a family from a financial attack. Then Keisha brought the paper. Ms. Rios testified first, about the door removed, about Savannah's fear, about the way Savannah's voice changed when asked to get a signature. Dr. Hale, Savannah's childhood pediatrician, testified next. Dr. Hale was calm, older, steady, the kind of witness jurors instinctively trust. She walked through the records and explained what those notes meant in plain language, how repeated injuries with inconsistent explanations raise concern, how a child's silence in an exam room can be a warning sign, how abusers often insist on staying in the room and answering for the child. The defense tried to corner her. "Doctor, you can't say with absolute certainty these injuries were caused by abuse." Dr. Hale didn't flinch. "Medicine rarely gives absolute certainty," she said. "But patterns matter, and this pattern is concerning." They pressed her on why she didn't stop it. Dr. Hale's eyes tightened with something like frustration. "I documented concerns. I asked questions. Without disclosure and without immediate danger, the system often fails to act. That failure doesn't make the harm unreal." Then Dr. Patel testified. She didn't talk about Douglas's character. She talked about the body. She explained what prior healing suggests, how repeated injuries can appear across time, how certain patterns don't align with simple clumsiness. And when the defense tried to reduce it to, "she fell a lot," Dr. Patel answered with a sentence that made the courtroom go quiet. "Children fall," she said, "but chronic fear does not show up on X-rays. It shows up in behavior, and behavior was documented too." Savannah watched the jury. One man stared at the table, jaw tight. One woman dabbed her eye without making a show of it, not because anyone was being dramatic, because the truth was, Then Savannah took the stand. The oath felt heavier than she expected. She spoke in scenes, not speeches. The warm climate, the cold one, the rules, the fear, the ER visits, the whispers, the way she learned to smile at school while her body stayed braced. Keisha asked, "Why did you start writing things down?" Savannah swallowed. "Because I kept forgetting what was real," she said. "Because he would act like nothing happened, and I'd start thinking I made it up." Keisha handed Savannah a pediatric note. "Read the highlighted line." Savannah read, "Injury inconsistent with explanation." Her voice shook. She didn't apologize for it. Keisha handed her another. "Asked patient privately if safe. At home." Patient hesitated. Savannah's throat tightened. "That was me," she said softly. The defense cross-examined, trying to make Savannah look inconsistent. "You never reported your father." "I was a child," Savannah answered. "You went back home." "I didn't have money," she said, "and I still believed it was my job to keep the peace." The attorney leaned into the familiar tone, dismissive, skeptical, like Savannah was exaggerating. Savannah recognized it instantly. So did the jury, because sometimes the courtroom shows the pattern in real time. Then Lila testified. She walked to the stand like someone moving through heavy water, eyes red, hands shaking. At first, she tried to protect the old story. She said, "She fell. She was clumsy." Keisha didn't argue. She placed Douglas's texts in front of Lila. "Say it was the stairs." "Keep her home tomorrow." "Don't let her talk to anyone." Lila's shoulders sagged. Her voice cracked. "He told me what to say," she whispered. The defense objected. The judge overruled. The jury watched. Keisha asked, gently now, "Why did you follow his instructions?" Lila stared at the floor. "Because I was afraid," she said. "Because I thought if I kept him calm, it wouldn't get worse." Keisha nodded. "Did it get better?" Lila's tears fell quietly. "No," she said. "It got quieter." That was the moment the jury stopped hearing this as a family disagreement. They heard it as a system inside a house. Control, fear, silence, repetition. Douglas testified last. He presented himself as a firm but loving father. He called Savannah sensitive. He said the injuries were accidents. He said she was misremembering. Keisha didn't attack him with anger. She attacked him with his own words. She displayed the texts to Lila. "Say it was the stairs." "Don't let her talk to anyone," Douglas claimed. They were misinterpreted. Keisha played the voicemail Douglas left after the lawsuit was filed. "You're going to pay for it." Douglas insisted it was frustration. Keisha asked, "Frustration at what, Mr. Pierce? At your daughter for speaking?" Douglas hesitated. Keisha asked another question, quiet, sharp. "Why were you so concerned about what nurses and teachers heard?" Douglas answered too quickly. "Because people judge." Keisha nodded. "So you controlled what they saw." Douglas said, "I controlled nothing." Keisha put up a clinic note. "Parent answers for patient." "Were you in the room?" she asked. "Yes." "Did you answer for her?" Douglas hesitated, then admitted, "Sometimes. I was trying to help." Keisha let that sit, because help can sound gentle, but in a pattern it becomes control, and control is what Douglas had used for years, not just to harm, to hide. Closing arguments came down to Otto. One question, was Savannah telling a story, or was she showing a pattern? Keisha pointed at the records. "You don't have to imagine," she said. "You can read what was written in real time." The defense told the jury to handle it privately. Privately. The word landed wrong, because privately was where the harm lived. Privately was where the injuries were explained away. Privately was where Savannah learned to lie. The jury heard it. Deliberations took 2 days. Savannah waited in a small room, sipping water she couldn't taste, listening to the thin sounds of footsteps in the hallway. On the second afternoon, the bailiff knocked. "They have a verdict." Savannah's legs felt unsteady as she walked back into the courtroom. The jury filed in. The foreperson held the paper with both hands. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes." "Liability?" "Yes." "Damages?" "Yes." "Compensatory damages for medical costs and therapy, for the measurable harm." And "punitive damages, because the jury believed Douglas's conduct was willful and because they believed he tried to conceal it. Total, $3 million. Savannah didn't gasp. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't celebrate. She simply sat there and breathed like her lungs had finally been given permission. Douglas's face went pale. His jaw tightened. For a moment, the suit didn't look like armor anymore. It looked like costume. The judge thanked the jury, then looked at Douglas. "This court will enter judgment accordingly," he said, and the sentence that followed wasn't shouted, wasn't dramatic, but it was the kind of consequence that echoes. "Mr. Pierce," the judge said, "your actions did not remain private because you wanted to protect your family. They remained private because you wanted to protect yourself." Savannah felt the impact in a strange, delayed way. Not as joy, more like the moment after a storm, when you realize you've been holding your breath for hours and you can finally let it out. Douglas didn't speak. He stared at the table, fingers gripping the edge until the skin around his knuckles tightened. In that posture, he looked less like the man who ran the room and more like a man being forced, for the first time, to sit inside consequences he couldn't intimidate away. Lila stayed seated behind the attorneys, hands folded in her lap, face wet with quiet tears. She didn't reach for Douglas. She didn't reach for Savannah. She just sat there, caught between the life she had defended and the truth she could no longer deny. Savannah expected to feel triumphant. Instead, she felt grief, sharp, clean grief, for the family she should have had, for the father she kept trying to find inside the warm climate, for the childhood that had been spent translating danger into obedience. And still, the verdict mattered, because a verdict is something a survivor doesn't have to argue for at the table. It's something that doesn't change when the abuser smiles, or when relatives say, "But he's your father," or when someone asks why you didn't speak sooner. It's ink, it's record. It's the world saying, out loud, that the harm was real. If you were sitting on that jury, looking at those notes and those texts, what would you have done? Protect the illusion of a family, or protect the truth of what happened inside it? Afterward, reporters tried to find Savannah. She didn't give interviews. She didn't become a headline on purpose. She walked out a side exit with Keisha into warm air and bright sun that felt almost offensive in its normalness. Keisha asked, "How do you feel?" Savannah stared at the courthouse steps, stone-worn smooth by generations of people asking to be believed. "I feel lighter," she said, "and I hate that it took a lawsuit to make the truth stick." Keisha nodded. "It didn't take a lawsuit," she said. "It took evidence. The lawsuit just gave it a microphone." Douglas appealed. The appeal failed. The judgment stood. Savannah used the money in the least cinematic way possible. Therapy, school, stability, a life built without fear, budgeting every decision. She didn't call it a win. She called it a record, because money can be spent, but a record changes what the world is allowed to pretend. Months later, Savannah received a letter from her mother. Not a text, not a voicemail, a letter. "I am sorry," Lila wrote. "I called it peace, but it was silence." Savannah read it twice and cried, not because the past was repaired, but because someone finally used the right word: silence. If you're listening and you're asking, how could nobody stop it? The truth is, some people noticed. They wrote notes. They asked questions. They hesitated before clicking accident, but noticing isn't stopping, and abusers rely on that gap between suspicion and action, between what's felt and what's said, out loud. Savannah's case changed because she built a bridge between memory and proof, a notebook, a pattern, and medical records that refused to forget. And near the end of the trial, after the courtroom emptied, Savannah stood alone for a moment where she had once sat under oath. She imagined her younger self, 8 years old, in an ER waiting room, lying because she thought lying was survival. Savannah whispered, not to the judge, not to the lawyers, not even to her father, to that child. "I believe you," she said, and for the first time, the quiet didn't feel like fear. It felt like space, like a life finally wide enough to breathe. If you've ever wondered whether a single note in a medical chart can matter, whether documentation can become a lifeline, Savannah's story is your answer. Truth doesn't always arrive as a confession. Sometimes it arrives as paper, and sometimes, finally, it arrives as a verdict that says what should have been said all along. You didn't deserve it, and you weren't imagining it.